Japan. And the really unique, I think, instance in the whole history of art, where the world has been aestheticized to that degree. There have been, of course, times when special groups in the society would be very much concerned. But one of the things which is, I think, always astounding to people is the spread, the fact that there's great numbers of people in Japan. It is really literally the whole nation that's involved in this quality of aesthetic consideration. And the result of it is something that gives a kind of uniformity to the culture itself. It's not anything which belongs only to one class or only to one group, but to the whole society. And the taste, that development of taste, is really consciously carried on, consciously achieved, consciously carried on. Not to the same extent that it was sometimes, it's like the wonderful ladies wearing 20 gowns and the men wearing 20 kimonos, and being judged on the quarter of an inch or less than that showed of each of the kimonos, and being judged, you see. And I suppose this is something. It's like the man that was thrown out of Kyoto for throwing away a piece of paper that was beautiful. The society stood behind it, and if you violated that, if you showed that you were not responsive to this, that you didn't really care very much about it, or that you were thoughtless about it, then you had to leave. You were literally exiled. And the development, the ramifications that we won't even, of course, be able to see because there's such things as flower arrangement. Now, exactly as with the painting of flowers in Japan, they're never painted as cut flowers. There's never a Japanese picture of flowers in a vase. And the flower arrangement attempted always to make it look as though the thing were growing. Obviously they weren't. But the main thing, and I think this is what makes it so remarkable, but also a little bit harder for all of us to see, and that is that everything that was done aesthetically was done from the point of view of meaning. The flower arrangement is not arrangement of flowers by the pretty colors, which could be the purely aesthetic, you see, or how nicely it goes with the vase or whatever it is, but instead with a meaning that stood behind it. So that the arrangement would be of something like, say, dead branches and a blossoming branch, brought into juxtaposition with perhaps something tall, because there goes always to be three levels of the flower arrangement, that would either unify the sense of something dead and something blossoming, or something which would, in a sense, transcend both of them. But it's the judgment. See, the aesthetic judgment is on the appearance of the thing. What does it look like? But then it's also on what is conveyed by it. What is the meaning of it? And that is really, it's a whole substructure of the response, the aesthetic response, that strengthens it, gives it roots, gives it meaning, so that it takes it a long time to become frivolous. Though the attention to beauty alone ordinarily very rapidly becomes frivolous and foolish, and something which is easy to make fun of. But instead, in Japan, it's rooted in the meaning, and the meaning that is, in a sense, an agreed on or traditional meaning. so that it isn't something that is that can be just playful or amusing or something which is a transitory kind of delight. And even such things as, well, everything that is used aesthetically is used with the sense's meaning. So that in, for instance, the picture that you'd have on the wall is what pictures you might have are limited by the season. If you have the wrong picture on your wall for the season, it shows again this kind of insensitivity. It either is ironical, and which would be a very sophisticated and really, I think, finally cynical way of doing. It's just as though you would get, say, a Christmas card from your friends for the 4th of July, saying Happy Christmas and 4th of July. And you would know, of course, that was that the person was joking, and of course we, our particular society, take neither Christmas nor the 4th of July with sufficient seriousness to exile anybody. I don't know that we can exile anybody for anything. Searching my mind for what could possibly exile you. Used to be able to be thrown out of college for being dumb. Thank God that's over. It was certainly a very unfair way to act. Anyway, there really aren't many places where we can enforce, or where we want to enforce any kind of exile on anybody for anything. So it is, I think, particularly fascinating to think of the Japanese having this really is not true of China. Though you get an extremely attenuated kind of aestheticism in the Song period, when China is really losing its power, it's declining from the Tang dynasty, but it never has that same absolute forcefulness that it has. In Japan, not only did the ladies wear these marvelous series of costumes, but in any kind of a celebration, any kind of a dinner or party or something, they would change their clothes about 4 or 5 times. They would just withdraw and come back in another set of kimonos. And they would have all kinds of wonderful things, you see, like kimonos all the same color, but different patterns. And then all the same pattern, but different colors. So that they had a wonderful sort of range that they could play on this quality of aestheticism. Well, let's look at some of the pictures now, so we can see a little bit if our wonderful screen can start its noble descent. You see, you should never forget something which is aesthetically important, and that is scale. And I told you when we first looked at things how terrible it is if we have to see everything in the same scale, how viciously bad it is for your own aesthetic development, and how hopeless it is for you to experience a work of art all in these same scales. It had, I think, such a very profound effect on people, that as the artists began to go to universities and be trained primarily by looking at slides, all of their size of picture got to be the size of slides projected, not ever the small size. So it was very obvious. It was very, very obvious. And they were always the same shape, the same as a projected size. So it can be an insidious dangerous thing for anybody. Now, one of the most beautiful things that they have in the game, just exactly as with the paintings, you see the screen that you had to be suitable to the season. And it had to have the same kind of marvelous concern with the fill and the void and the balancing of emptiness and congestion. And such a screen as this, in the 15th century on, the magnificence of the screen is just something that's just hard to believe. They're so splendid, partly because a great many of them are in gold. And the background may be gold, as this one. And this richness that gives us the same kind of sumptuousness and richness that you have in the use of gold in the Middle Ages in painting. Gold with a gold background. It gives two colors, a wonderful kind of velvety richness that they really can't have except under those circumstances. And so, such a screen as this. Let's look at the next one. This is a detail of the maple tree that you saw on the previous one. And it's a sense of the whole rush of these trees, the rush of the leaves, and the whole wonderful complexity that played against that emptiness. Let's look at the next one. Another see. And there, over and over, it's that same pine tree that we see it. Over and over, the same thing. And the same parts of nature. I think that's something which is well, our closest Western understanding, I believe, is the use of the human body, the human being. Every time that is used, it sets up resonances with the hundreds of years that it has been used in the West. The body of man in the West has been seen at least twice as the most aesthetic object, in terms, not, you see, just of its beauty, but of its meaning. So that the use of the body, the use of the human being, would set up these remembrances, and still necessarily must set up for us remembrances of all of the uses of human beings that we have ever seen in the West. And the kind of idealization that we made possible around the human being, and this really, it doesn't exist. You could say that it doesn't exist anywhere except around the Mediterranean. That is, Greece and the Renaissance. Greece and Rome, insofar as they were able, of course, Romans stood under an aesthetic cloud, which they could never get out from. So their use and their hope around the body was always being, I suppose, because they abused it. So always remember that the Romans were the only people in the world that built a vomitarium next to the dining room so they could eat more than one dinner. Now, I know a lot of people trying to get thin do that now, but for a whole society to do it, anytime you see that they started building vomitariums next to dining rooms in this country, I think you can consider it a bad sign. It's probably, as people have been saying for years, but most people don't say now, a bad sign that we bathe. There's a very distinct correlation between degeneracy and bathing, and all of the saints realize that. That's what's called the odor of sanctity. Other people, of course, have realized this very clearly. But the vomitorium takes it farther. But aside from the Romans, the power to conceive of the human being as being really the measure of all things is a very special Western power. And even now, despite everything, and no matter how peculiarly perverse the idea is, it still is a part of our thinking about people, part of our thinking about the world. It may take the form of absolute narcissism. It may take the form of the extreme cultivation of the body and so on. But it is something that ought to be able to give us at least a little insight into the way this pine tree can be used. This identical tree, or almost, and really very often identical, contains all of the previous pine trees in China and in Japan. And so that when people see it, they know what it means in a way that is beyond simply the words of it. And so the play of the twisting tree and these blooming flowers, that endless play of opposites, of the beauty and freshness, loveliness of flowers and the rough, twisting old tree that shows all that's happened to it, shows what winds have blown on it, shows what weather it's had to survive, it's shown what ground it grew in. And the flowers, of course, show only their absolute loveliness, freshness, and the fact that they haven't experienced. And the play between the emptiness, the gold emptiness of the background, and these things in the foreground, and of course, the beauty of grass, the way it turns and the way it is so delicate and sharp. All of these things are used again and again. And they would be also, they of course would be used in ikebana, in the arrangement of flowers, because they contain the meaning. They carry that meaning. Let's look at the next one. And then they carry it so beautifully. Marvelous. This is again a pine tree of which you see only the top and the flowers and grasses. And I have a tail. Let's look at the next. That's one side. One of the great challenges to anybody that is trying to use nature in something is the fact that the forms are the same, so that the leaf pattern is the same. But it, of course, is not the same, too. And the play between cultivating the quality of the sameness of the leaves so that they make an impression of what they are. I mean, they declare what they are. And at the same time, are sufficiently varied, or the spaces between them are sufficiently interesting or exciting, so that the totality is more than just the effect of the one shape, the one form. And this is one of the things which, of course, is one of the most demanding and one of the most difficult things in any kind of use of natural form. How can they be used? Let's look at the next slide where you have the same form, exactly as you have with bamboo. You have here the same form, the grasses, but each one has a sufficient difference, so that when we look at it, we get the effect of this arching of these very sharp and delicate things, over and over, really building a kind of cage or screen there. And yet, when we look at it, without knowing it, one of the things that is that constitutes great joy to us, because I think that you always have to remember, and particularly if you're an artist, you have to remember that people are very easily bored. And I mean, they really are, and this is a great protection, and it's a good thing that they are. But they are, nonetheless, very easily bored. And the artist, the function of the artist, is to pull them out of that boredom, to raise them out of that boredom, by showing them something which they have, in a sense, never seen before. And part of the way of doing that, when you're using things which, of course, they've seen over and over and over, as you've seen this grass over and over and over, if you've looked at it, is to make the arrangement of it fresh. And one of the ways that that's achieved is by what's called a negative space in art. That is not the space that is filled, not the thing which is filling the space, but the interstices. So that the excitement, and this is true of any work of art, actually, including those works of art that aim to be dull. And in the modern period, a lot of people want their work to be very dull, because the whole anti-asceticism that makes them want it to be dull. But it's hard, really, to make something as dull as they wish it could be. But it's also partly because you don't have to see any modern work but maybe once or twice in your life. And so it's a little bit harder to be boring under those circumstances. But the thing which we respond to without knowing that we respond to it is just try to, for a moment, just look at this marvelous variety of the spaces between the grass. And you see that whole pattern in the middle of the four pieces of grass that grow up like that, four blades that grow up like that. And yet, you see there's just the subtlest difference between the size of those areas. And then now when you look at along the side, over here on the side, there's no repetition of the shape or of the size of the shape. And yet the thing is held together because you see we're always, and as human beings, we're always, I think, balancing between chaos and monotony, boredom and something which is too much for us to deal with. And the threat of either is very disagreeable. And what the artist does is try to find the middle way, or try to prevent our being overthrown by the variety, by the extravagant variety of things, or being bored by the endless monotony of things. And so, if you study this, just from that point of view, you learn a great deal about what all artists have had to deal with. Let's look at the next one. I think I have a couple more. And yes, this is a very beautiful one again on gold pattern, gold background. Again, it's plum trees, blossoming plum trees, the old trees, twisted, gnarled, beaten up by life, and from it comes the exquisite, pure, innocent white flower. And that you see is just it's an endless revelation of the mystery of the world, an endless poetic statement of it, visualization of it. Another thing that is, I think, particularly noticeable in this is the way that water is treated. Because water in Japan is always treated from the point of view of its weight. In the West, water is characteristically all through the whole period of Western civilization, from the point of view of the surface, shimmering. And whether you're being a little child, making waves that way, which have been made through the centuries by just endless people in the Western world. Now, in Japan, it's the sense of the weight of the water, the power and weight of the water. And it's again back to the Taoist idea of the thing which seems to be weak, or have really you move your hand through water and it's only a slight drag, it's not any pull. But water is so powerful, of course we all learned last year, so enormously powerful, that really if in a sense it decides to destroy something, nothing can stop it. It's just enormously strong and powerful, and it's that quality of the power of water that the Japanese are always concerned with, rather than the surface. Let's look at the next one. I have a detail of the side of that one, the detail on the upper side. You can see the water and the flower. Let's look at the next one. Here's another also of the sense of the power of water. And water having of course, again, I think something which is not as easy for us to understand. The feeling that everything is living. It's more than just an animism. It's not. You see, animism is a belief that there is a spirit in everything, and everything has a part of a spirit. But the conception, the Japanese conception, comes out of Buddhism, and is that the thing actually has life. In some schools of Buddhist thought, everything, the stones, dirt, can reach Buddhahood, can be enlightened. It may take, of course, millennia, but it is something. Nothing is not living. And living its own life, as living its, in a sense, chosen life. Let's look at the next one. Another, the screen and the door, and our tree and the blossoms. Again, over and over, these familiar forms. Just look at the next one. One of the aesthetic developments of Japan is, remember I spoke about the fact that there is not only is there no sense of the body as being something which is very useful aesthetically, but that all appurtenances is the clothes, 20 dresses on top of each other, and all that can be added, the elaboration of hairdo, and that of course reached such points that there's a similar kind of thing that happened in the 18th century. People had an elaboration of hair, the dressing of hair with all kinds of beautiful things stuck in it, and lacquered, and the hair was lacquered, and consequently you have those hard pillows that some of you saw at the Young Museum. They're not pillows in our sense of pillows, because they're just a piece of porcelain or sometimes carved jade or something, put right back of the neck, So the hairdo won't touch the ground or the pillow or the bed. And it's a very good thing in the sense that it supports the head very comfortably. But it is not at all our idea of a pillow. Exactly the opposite of our idea of a pillow. But the fan is another thing. This is a screen of fan. The fan is another thing, which is a kind of adjunct. And it became a very important one. If any of you have ever seen a kabuki dancers or seen a theater or seen no dramas, you realize that the fans are always used. And they're used by the men as well as by the women. And they are very expensive. In a sense, you see, they elongate the fan. And they do this kind of thing. You can make a gesture with a fan. Not just the gestures which are possible in terms of what the fan is doing, but the opening and closing of the fan has an effect of being punctuation to what's done. So the fan can be snapped open, and it makes a definite noise when it's snapped open, and it can be snapped shut. And it conveys then emotional changes or alterations or any number of things. It simply acts as an adjunct, and it was a very important part. And fans were beautifully decorated. Let's look at this. Remember that the Jasper said Monday the fashion came into the Western world, and people painted fans. Then, in the 19th century and into the 20th, early. Let's look at some of these. I haven't detailed it. See, there's our wonderfully familiar scene again. A man pursuing a water buffalo. In the sense that the water buffalo is the soul, or is the unattainable, and man falls to it. And finally, if he is successful, he may ride on it. But it's that the relationship that's here evoked, and though the fan is this, aesthetic object, it has this deeper significance, this deeper meaning, that would be perfectly evident. Let's look at the next one. There's another springtime, the fan of painting springtime in the country. Our tree and the blossom. Let's look at the next one. And of course, the beauty of textiles, which is one of the things that everybody recognized very early on in the Japanese art. And that it's really almost incalculable. It's very, I'll show you a few examples. But again, it is like a screen. These kimonos were a part of the recognition of what the world was about. And your kimonos had to suit the season of the year, and they had to suit the time of the year. And they had, of course, then this marvelously complex and subtle relationship with each other, and in such a thing as the theater, as dancing, the relationship with the various costumes is incredible. I don't know how many of you have seen kabuki dances, but I should think by this time most of you would have. Been on television, they've been everywhere that people can readily see them. And the thing which, of course, almost the only thing that we can get out of kabuki theater is the beauty of the costume. And then we can't get the actual, in a sense, the meaning of the beauty of the costume. We can simply be dazzled, and we cannot be anything but dazzled by the magnificence, by the absolute astounding variety and brilliance and and vastness, because the costumes go, all 10 feet in diameter. When the people move, which you know they move about like this. You don't notice me moving. You wouldn't if I were in a kabuki theater either. So they all have severe arthritis that prevents any kind of rapid movement. And the whole point of it is that extremely slow, absolutely slow movement. And then the costume is enormous. Because the person is really lost. The person is totally lost because of very heavy makeup or mask, and a very elaborate hairdo, and then these elaborate costumes. But the beauty of them is just absolutely incredible. It's just an amazing thing. We can see something in the subtlety of the pattern that goes over this pattern. It's just a tiny little pattern in the cross pattern that's almost invisible. Let's look at the next one. This is when it's all stretched out. You can imagine how different it would be. See here you have a detail of that. The cow pattern goes over as though this whole garment were just clouded over with that wonderful beauty that clouds allow. They allow us to see the brilliance of the thing which they don't know. By making dim the part of the sky which they do, they reveal the blueness and beauty of it in the fact that they don't cover it. And the same thing happens with this pattern. Let's look at the next one. Now this one also with the sense of snow being on the branches. Then you see how the gradation from the bottom to the top, the pattern of that sort of weave going through the whole thing. I have a detail of that. Let's look at that too. You consider that these things are woven. The degree of skill, they're embroidered also, woven. And the degree of skill that it took is one thing that's sufficient to absolutely astound. But the more remarkable thing is the beauty and the complexity of the pattern itself, the design itself. Let's look at the next one. This is again the theme of flowers. This is a seasonal kimono. Flowers of spring patterns. Let's look at the next one. And there's like the paintings of the Battle of the Carts. And again, it is the use of those wheels, dark wheels, making a dramatic accent. And since that was the Battle of the Carts was one of the important sagas or important stories from Japan, everybody would recognize that significance as well. They would again act to echo something, to echo the story of the Genji Monogatari. Let's look at the next one. This is a garment of 4 seasons. The next one. There's just such a range. what an extraordinary thing this is. Next one. Now, the tea ceremony is, of course, the thing which is always taken as one of the most significant developments of the Japanese. It begins in China. It's associated with Shang Buddhism in China, but it reaches a much more developed point in Japan, much more central to the Japanese aesthetic and to their whole form of entertainment. It's become something which is very much more important, and something furthermore which is as marvelously stylized, because it's again turning something into a work of art, not allowing any accident to be in it, to make it as much as possible what you have ordered and decided it should be. And that's going through the whole thing, going through the way the napkins are folded, going through the way the tea is drunk, and of course what is said. And the action is absolutely stylized, completely predetermined, and is meant to be held to. The bowl which you receive is supposed to be turned so that you see it in all of these different, all of its sides, and give it a proper admiration with that. And your drinking of it has to be 3 gulps. Every part of it is determined. It's all absolutely controlled and determined. And yet it was the greatest delight to people, the greatest joy to people, and particularly to the intellectuals, to meet this way. Just such things as the tea house itself, this is one of them, was absolutely, by this time, that is by the time of the Ashikaga period, by the 15th, 16th century, and there was such a taste for absolute simplicity and for a kind of roughness, and that there was, in a way, it was a turning against the elaboration and splendor of such things as the golden screens that we see. And the tea ceremony became something which actually imitated, in terms of what things you had and what kind of bowls you had and everything else, imitated a peasant world. And the bowl was supposed to be not too perfect, and everything had to have a touch of imperfection which was conspicuous. But it was designed. It was not that you couldn't help this imperfection, but that you deliberately chose this imperfection, so that you could at once affirm your aesthetic quality and not deny it, but limit it. But in the limiting, you were really affirming. So that the taste for something which was highly polished, and something which was absolutely perfected, simply disappeared from this the tea ceremony world. And instead, there was a taste which finally even got to the making of tea bowls while the people were waiting. While you were waiting to have the tea, they would be made and fired, so they were, of course, very rough, and they were meant to be. And the tea house itself, was as simple as possible, The most important thing was that the door was very low so that you could not enter it without stooping. And this was to emphasize the humility that was a part of what the tea ceremony was about. Let's look at the next one. I have another view of a tea house. See, they're absolutely bare. And then a small table would be put in, but it would be each time, you see, it would be put in. And each time the things were brought in. So that it was the whole thing was created really like a stage set. And of course it has very much that quality. Let's look at the next slide. And of course famously the gardens. The gardens also. Now again, the gardens cannot mean anything to Western people in the same way that they meant to the Japanese. It's absolutely impossible. Because the whole reading of the garden was based on the theory of the meaning of life, not on just the appearance of the garden. And it could be so carefully, it was of course, the making of a garden could take your whole life. You not only would have the particular vision of what you wanted in the garden, but you would have also such things as arranging the plants so that when the wind moved through them, that there was a certain sound. And arranging the plants with some broad leaves and some narrow leaves, so that when the rain fell on them, you had a different kind of garden than you had in the summer. And the whole music of the garden, the wind and the rain, were part of what you arranged, part of what you created, if you could, if you were able to. And then the treatment of the filled and void, the thing which was full and which was rich, and even like a full screen of plants, and then which was absolutely empty, nothing but gravel. But the gravel raked in a certain way, and the gravel raked every day in a certain time. So that it sounds precious, and I think, let's look at the next slide. I have a couple of others. The thing which prevents it from a really disagreeable kind of preciousness is the fact that it hungers for real meaning. It hungers for something which is not just at the surface. And it aims to evoke much more profound feeling than the feeling of the gracefulness of beauty of the scene. Let's look at the next slide. Or the choice of colors or something of that nature. Let's look at the next one. One of the things which they did, and you can see a little bit in this one, is that they made different sense of depth. It's a way of conveying that what you make is more than that. So that the feeling of roughness or harshness or coarseness is only really satisfactory against a world of finish, of high finish. And I suppose a part of our own taste for things which we call ethnic, things which are peasant things and coarse things for the most part, is the way they play against our machine world. and the high polish of machine things. But this was playing against the beauty of those screens and playing against the marvelous variety of glazes that were perfectly possible and were used, but not in the tea ceremony. Let's look at the next two. They're all the same. You can see here's again an ash glaze. And the feeling of it being, it gives a feeling of spontaneity. Exactly as the tea ceremony requires an appearance of spontaneity when it's exactly the opposite. Let's look at the next. I think you recognize, let's look at the next one, how much like our present taste this is. So all the things that I've shown you are the latest of 16th century. Let's look at the next one. Look at that. You see, this is exactly the same way. What it's doing when you do something like that, when you make that scratchy pattern a long time, is that you're playing that against the actual skills which you have or which are available to you, the skills that are available, so that you can otherwise it wouldn't have any kind of value at all. But because it is so consciously not what the other things were, that it becomes something which is very valuable. Let's look at the next one. And the next one, I think, is one that has a nice fin. There are blades of grass again. Another manifestation. And of course, some of these decorations, you can imagine, are of such extraordinary beauty and freshness, but they were too contrived for the kind of contrivance of the tea ceremony we want. Let's look at the next one. Now, Jasper showed you this Monday, and I want to show you again to you because I think it's one of the greatest of the Peoria school, which was a school in the end of the 19th century, school of woodcuts, colored woodcuts, which really, as Jasper said, much more like colored lithography. It's easier for us to think of than woodcuts, because our own tradition of woodcutting is so far from it. But they were made by artisans. The designs were made by the artists, they were then translated into woodcuts by artisans, and the number of blocks that they could use would be as much as 32 or 33 blocks for one painting, one edition. And so that the tiniest little spot, one block, you see, would have nothing on it but one spot. One single note of yellow or pink or whatever it was. And the taste, this is the ideal taste of the time. It's very subdued, it is the taste of gray and brown and dark rusty red. And the achievement is, of course, is brilliant in these pictures. It's just the touch of the same color red there that's in his sash, in her sash. That only part, only yellow in this whole thing is that little edge around the leaf. Let's look at the next one. This is the ukiyo-e means of floating world, and that's exactly what it was. The easiest way you can understand it is to think of the world of the Sunday supplement that comes in papers, and it's exactly the same subject matter, and it's the same, and was treated the same way, except with this much more, first of all, a very profound tradition telling him how everything should be, and second, the high aesthetic quality, which was the thing that they most valued. So the same things that we would have in the Sunday supplement. That is one thing, of course, beautiful women, and that's one of the great themes of the ukiyo-e school. Is beautiful women. And doing ordinary things, doing peculiar things, doing special fancy things, just standing, putting on makeup, it's exactly what you would see. A lot of them are famous beautiful women. Actresses, only of course they're men, but they're made up to look like women. Because in the classical drama, no women took any part. The men took the parts of women, and they were not. It's not as though they were transvestites. They weren't at all. It was simply a tradition in a certain family that the people played the parts of women as much as they could. And of course, it's a very. You can wonder why it is that in the highest periods of drama, women were never allowed on the stage. That's something for you to speculate about for quite a while. Maybe because to tell whether, maybe it's because acting is the easiest thing in the world for all women. I've never known one that couldn't rise to an acting occasion. And this is a good thing. I'm proud to be a member of that peculiar race of women. The difficulty for a man to play the part of a woman is great, so that the acting then can be judged in a very much, very clear way. And then the tradition meant that the people were famous for certain roles, the roles of women. And that's still true in Japan. To my absolute astonishment, and I can hardly believe it, but I have the word of Kate Smith, that in modern Japanese musicals, the men's parts are taken by women. And if that doesn't give you an odd picture, I don't know it. It's because it's a very peculiar thing. If any of you have ever partaken in such things in a girls' school, you realize that it's a marked limit to the dramatic possibility. But it's nonetheless is true. And the tradition of the female impersonator is still very strong in the classical drama. So here, beautiful women gathering flowers. Let's look at the next one. And there is bird on a branch, another great theme. It's exactly, you see, just almost every issue of the Sunday supplement has exactly these things in it. And exactly these things are endlessly agreeable to people, and endlessly they want to see them. Now, they want to see a beautiful woman. They want to see a bird on a branch. They want to see flowers. They want to see actresses. They want to see boats. Boy, boats, you know how much they always do. And they, on it goes. These themes absolutely struck completely at what people always want. And Japan was, in a sense, wealthy enough to provide these things, and they talk like, well, we can't can't even figure, but it would be much less than a penny apiece. And in fact, the great numbers of them got through this country because they were used as packing in the tea trade. Just as you wrap newspapers you see around things, people would wrap these prints around something in order to ship it something. So, and then somebody saw it and they said, "My gosh, this is wonderful, I want one." And so they began the collection of them. And then, of course, now they've gotten to be, possible to buy and so on. And very widely collected and preserved. Let's go to the next slide. And of course, they're no longer made to the same degree. And one of the most famous ones that people became, who made these things, became well known and popular, Oversize, one of them. Let's look at the next one. He's the one whose book on cover, Draw, you saw. Let's look at the next one. And his whole tribute to Mount Fujiyama. This is Fuji in a rainstorm and lightning there below. And the next one, this is another view of it. And the next one, this is, of course, perhaps one of the most famous. All of them. And there's Fujiyama in the background again. But the thing that we see is these marvelous, heavy, and living waves that are so threatening to the people in boats. You can hardly see the people in boats. The waves are so dominant, they're so loud, they're so huge and so loud, that the people are vigilant or something. Of course, and maybe will be drowned. Look at the next one. And Hiroshige is another. One of the things which they like, of course, again, it's just Sunday supplement, is weather. They like to show rain and rainstorms and sun and beaches and people enjoying themselves, having picnics, watching the moon. Let's look at the next slide. And of course the traditional things for the times of the different seasons of the year. Our plum tree blossoming. The next one. And another season. Birds in the snow. If you just took a list of these titles, you could find an exact one for every single one. You could find the exact same. Let's look at the next one. Let's look at the next one. There are iris, and people beyond them in the fields. And the next one, see, there's perfect people having a picnic, watch the moon come up. And these people going up there to get on the little rise of ground so they can watch the moon. Let's look at the next one. And the beautiful women. This is a beautiful woman writing a letter, reading a letter. That complication of that, the obi that she's wearing. And the next one. That's three beautiful women. Just highlight this. And you can see that overlapping of those kimonos, different colors, different patterns. And the next one is called A Woman Skilled in Makeup. Look at the correspondence of that mustard color in her hair with the mustard color in the kimono. And then the one that she has under that the blue one, and then under that, the red. Let's look at the next one. It's another beauty, and it's a perfect illustration of that tendency for the person to be lost in the absolute splendor of things. It's very hard to even see that there is a person. And you move up through these codes, but that's a case which occurs very often. It's not just the Japanese, but the Japanese stay with it also. Let's look at the next one. Women beside the seashore. Okay. Look at the tastefulness of that Dharma on the right over the other one. Next one. This is called Lovers on a Journey. And the next one. Lovers after a night of love, saying farewell in the morning. Next one. And here's a marvelous one of them. Again, easily discoverable in the Sunday supplement. This is called a courtesan of high rank. And though she wouldn't be called that in the Sunday supplements in our time, everybody would know that's what she was. Here she is, magnificently bundled up in those clothes and nothing showing but her upper part of her very handsomely made up face. All her entourage and servants around her. Let's look at the next one. Here's a scene from the play of a man and a woman. Of course, they're both actors, female impersonator. Right. Next one. And there is a female impersonator as an actress. And you see when they were exactly as with the Sunday supplement, when they appeared in the paper, they had you knew who they were. You knew the man's name, and you knew, in this instance, what role he was playing. So that you would recognize that immediately. That would be part of your pleasure. Let's look at the next one. There's two women inside the house, and it's called hearing the clock go. Very lyrical passage of time. Next one. And here is an actor. This is an actor in his role in a no drama. And there again, what is it that speaks in this? The thing that speaks to you is costume. You couldn't possibly, it's all you can do to get to the face, and then the face is really not a human face. It's an actor face or a mask, or so heavily made up that you couldn't possibly read it except as you are instructed to read it by the convention of the makeup. Let's look at the next one. I have another of the actors. They just like it's such a marvelous thing. They just as though they just leapt into a whirling arrangement of marvelous patterns and textures and colors that they're just so intoxicating and so marvelous that the person is drowned in them. He's just lost them or drowned in them. But the whole play because these costumes meant something. It's exactly like the flower arrangement. They meant, and what they meant is clear. If you wore this kind of costume, it meant this, that you were a villain. Now, the stage has always had a certain element of that. But here it's carried to a very great point. Let's look at the next one. Next one. Next one. This is one of my favorites, and of course it's also, again, Sunday supplement stuff, because this is a wrestling match. Now, it may take you a moment or two to work that out, but these are those marvelous Sumi wrestlers, huge, enormously fat, enormously heavy men, and look at this face. That one has thrown him down. The poor umpire, whatever it's called, back there, certainly life is in danger, I think. I wouldn't want to tell one of these men that he's lost. Let's look at the next one. And here are this would go on the cover of the Sunday supplement. Except that it wouldn't be as beautiful. That's the main thing. It wouldn't be as beautiful. It would aspire to be. It would want to be. Because that's always a prompting that we have. But it wouldn't be. It wouldn't get to it. Let's look at the next one. You see what you see when you look at the ukiyo-e things is you see the end of a great tradition, and a tradition that was able to endure for hundreds of years, and was able to instruct the people who wanted to enter it with an absolutely clear instruction. So clear, of course, that it could be put in a book, and it would be put in a book by one of the greatest artists of the time, not just somebody of no aesthetic quality. And the tradition allowed a knowledge of gesture, of movement and gesture, which was enormous. I mean, we see it's exactly, it is the thing that's behind bamboo. It is a tradition of the power and the excitement of the gesture itself. And whether it is bamboo, or whether it's a mountain, or whether it's a waterfall, or whether it is boats coming in, whatever, the thing which is chosen is this power of the gesture. And the thing which the tradition maintains, and the tradition instructs in, absolutely, is exactly that, on the principle that what everything is, really, what it reveals itself. Whatever it is, it reveals itself through gesture. And if you can capture the gesture, you've captured the thing. And so that the tradition can continue, and it can embrace then all kinds of things, as it can embrace this mad poet throwing his poems in the air. Or it can embrace any of the things that you saw. And by the time of the 19th century, the tradition is enormously powerful. It hasn't, of course, begun to decline. It hasn't begun to soften or weaken, because there hasn't been any kind of exterior influence on it. And it has maintained itself because, I think, because it is maintained by the belief that stands behind it. has to have a belief. It never, every artistic tradition has to have some kind of belief or interpretation. I said this to you once before, that all artists are concerned with reality. That there's never anyone who wants to make something which is unreal. The aim is always to make something which is real, because we're all conscious of the fact that we only have a little time in the world, and that no matter at what level we're conscious of that, we may be almost unconscious or we may be deeply and continuously conscious of it, but we're all conscious of it, because that's one of the things that a human being has to know, is that we have only a little time on the earth. And to give yourself, even to give yourself for the amount of time that a discipline making something imposes on you, to something which is unreal, it's totally unreal, is simply, people won't do it. Why should they? They won't. They won't. They only will do what they believe is real. But of course that is enormously widely interpreted. But any tradition has a conviction about the nature of reality behind it, that it allows people to learn the tradition. That is, it allows people to continue to learn it. And that tradition, which was really Zen Buddhism, continued to stand behind Japan, and then, of course, in the 20th century has been to a great extent revived, so that you still have at least some rudiments of this. Let's look at the next slide, because I want you to see, and I think you're going to immediately see, how helpless the artist is outside of his tradition. See, the last two things you've seen were done by the same person who was Hokusai. And Hokusai was a great master, there's no question about that at all. But he has absolutely no tradition of the nude. There isn't really any tradition of the nude in the art. There isn't any interest in it. It doesn't have the erotic appeal. It doesn't have the ideal appeal or anything else that it has for Western people. So when he tries to do, and by now, of course, after the middle of the 19th century, people are accustomed to Western things in Japan. And he naturally, inevitably, does a nude. But it really, it really is part of it. The only part that's nice about it is the gesture. The gesture has some authority and some authenticity. But the body itself is a dumb sack of nothing. Now, you may think that's what the body is anyway, but it is not the way it's been represented in the Western world. And look at her feet and the way to her butt and her stomach and all of that. And you'll see that this is something. You see, artists, there's nothing more pathetic than the artist outside of his tradition. He's just pathetic. Because he can't, he has to rely on his own poor little slender self. And that is never enough. Never. For anybody, for anything. And for the artist, it's absolutely fatal. He cannot do anything except something which is either derivative or awkward or, any number of things, but never anything really good. It's just not in the cards. And no matter what genius he has, and certainly there's just no question in the world that Hokusai has genius. But as soon as he attempts something which really is not comprehended in his tradition, he cannot make anything which is really anywhere near up to the other things that he makes, you see. It just simply isn't. And the only thing about it that has a spark at all is the thing which comes from his tradition, which is the compelling quality of gesture. The gesture shows has a sharpness to it and a clarity to it that the body doesn't have at all. And I could show you no end of others. They're all exactly the same. That is, they're all the same, that you sense it. It's just embarrassing when you think of what person you was, you know, and then what he had to do. So that the kind of support that's given by tradition, and it's given not in any kind of conscious way necessarily. I mean, it isn't anything that. I hate to use the word tradition because the word tradition has been debased so terribly. And I have a theory that the word tradition is never used when there is a tradition. That the minute that you use the word tradition, that means there isn't any. Or whatever it is. That it's no longer functional. That doesn't work. It's being viewed from outside. And I know that this is true. Because if you happen to know anybody who is really deep into some kind of tradition, if you ask them about why they do this, they never say because it's tradition. They say because it's right. Because it's the right way to do it. It's the right thing to do. They never say it's because it's tradition. And I believe that the use of the word, interestingly, the word religion as such was never used until the 19th century. Until, in fact, religions began to fall apart. There's something about naming, you see. It's like the dowel. The dowel that can be talked about is not the true dowel. And the tradition that will be talked about, or is talked about, or is referred to, simply is not a true tradition. It's something which may be commercial. I mean, so that you say, it's traditional to have a beautiful silver service or something. It's a purely commercial thing. Or you use traditional bride's gown or whatever it is. You know how the word is used in the crassest kind of commercial way. But that's because it doesn't have any other existence. It doesn't have any real other existence. And when that happens in Japan, which of course isn't until the end of the 19th century, the beginning of the 20th, and then the whole thing falls apart. Let's look at the next one. Here's another. You see how absolutely and peculiarly awkward and unvital these things are. Because there you have exactly what the tradition most gloried in and was most magnificent in, which was the beauty and elaboration of things, the magnificence of costumes, the beauty of arrangement of things, the play and interplay between pattern and color and so on. All of these things have don't exist then when you get to this. And except for the actual architecture, so these creatures are like some sort of slugs in a cage, is what they are. And they're meant to be beautiful women again taking baths. And they aren't that at all. They're really just awful. Let's look at the next slide, because I showed you this before, and this is the thing which is so dangerous, because there is a point in religious development that goes beyond tradition and finds all of the restrictions and even doctrinal differences and everything unimportant. And that point is very rarely reached by people. but it is occasionally weak. And when it is, then the monk laughs at the moon. He's laughing at the yang and the yin. He's laughing at the basis of his belief. And he can do that with safety because he's gone that far, presumably. But other people can't. And when they are cut off from the tradition, when they're cut off from the faith, they are lost. Exactly as Hokusai was. It isn't possible, you see, to invent a tradition. It isn't possible to affect a tradition. And of course, I don't know enough to know, but I imagine that our efforts in ceramics to look like tea ceremony ceramics must be simply hilarious to the Japanese. I don't doubt that they sit and giggle over them for the hours. I don't doubt that for 1 minute. I would never be able to see it. See, I would never be able to see it. Because my eyes are not trained, my life is not trained to see it. But I don't doubt it. And I'm sure that they look as flabby and weird as our ladies look, as Hokusai ladies look. Because you can neither invent nor adopt nor imitate the tradition. It is impossible. All that you do is imitate the surface, and this is true of any aspect of the tradition. You cannot grasp it. But once it is gone, once the tradition is gone, our longing for something to transcend our own feeble selves, and we all know, everybody knows how feeble he is, it's just not going to be answered. It's not going to be answered. We are born in what the Chinese consider the worst curse in the world, in an interesting time. And we cannot act traditionally. We cannot really submit to a tradition, except at the gravest peril. And to imitate them is apt to be simply absurd and ludicrous. Thank you very much.